Hi, I'm Alicia. Thank you for joining us today. And before you take this journey with us, I just want to say this is a podcast, okay? This is not a therapy session. Yes, we talk about real and sometimes heavy stuff, so consider this your trigger warning. And I'm a licensed therapist, but nothing here is medical advice or a substitute for professional mental health care. Because remember, we're just like talking to comedians. Anyway, welcome to Xanyland. I have an editor, right? And he's going to just take out whatever is not appropriate.
Of course. But, so much of that seems inappropriate sometimes is really appropriate because it's just insights, if you will, doors opening to rooms in our minds and our souls.
Oh, so good.
They
So
give you
good.
an insight to how cluttered it is in there. Yes, I have this many stuffed bunnies. Don't judge me. Kind of stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Welcome to the Xanyland podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Racine, a licensed therapist. And we're hanging out with comedians because who else is going to be honest about being crazy?
I'm excited to hear about what you have to teach me.
Oh, am I the expert? Is that technically?
Yes. I'm just here hanging out for this podcast, which is about mental health. Which, by the way, I saw your Just Saying.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That was fucking fantastic. That was like one
thanks.
of my favorite things that I've seen. It was so rad. Yes, for the listeners, my hope and dreams is that I bring comedians on that are a voice of our culture, right? Unfortunately, I know probably most comedians didn't get into comedy. They probably got to comedy for amalgam of traumas and things that brought them there and brought them the talent that they have. But now they happen to have people's ear and they comment on culture and they usually have unique perspectives about culture. And my hope is that I'm bringing people on here that are conscious or at least aligned with mental health and speak to it from a new perspective that I feel like it doesn't exist right now in society. I feel like since the pandemic, there's been a huge boom with mental health, but unfortunately, capitalism loves a sick person, and it's gone tech wild, right? I mean, it's being monopolized. We have BetterHelp advertisements everywhere, and I do want to bring people mental health. I think that's important, but I feel like many people are just not educated on it. It was stigmatized for so long. All of a sudden it's not. And most of the information is coming from TikTok and things like that, which is great because democratized information is fine. I unfortunately think that I want to hear a licensed therapist talking to someone in the culture that's really open about their experiences in the world and giving information that is at least uniquely radically candid and authentic.
I like that as a thesis, for sure. For sure.
Let's see if we can do it.
Let's see.
Fucking see if we can do it. I haven't seen you in a long time. You were a baby when I saw you last.
A baby? I don't know if I was a baby. We were both babies.
We were both
technically,
babies.
right?
Technically.
20-somethings even, right?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
It's the same with comedy. Like, I have to explain, like, the basics of what a joke is, how it works, how you even come up with one, write it. Just the idea of getting on stage and what it means, how you hold a microphone, how you present on stage. And each of them has, so there's like, those are the facts, but it's still up to you to figure out what you want to do with those facts.
100%. Like, how do you want to actually be? What kind of performer do you want to be? Do you want to be slapsticky? Do you want to be yourself? Do you want to be kind of a character, right? I'm sure there are some people that are just really pretty much a character they've created.
Absolutely. And I teach that. I say that I'm doing the kind of like personal truth confessional style of comedy. But there are comedians who don't share a thing about who they actually are that are still really good at what they do. And that's a legit path. So I was trying to make that clear to people that, you can, there's famous comics out there like, I don't know if you really believe that or if that's who you are. And but that works for them, and for them, probably in their personal lives, it's also a great separation to be like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
I'm not saying exactly everything that's real on stage. My personal life is only mine and no
Yeah.
one else's. That might be helpful for some of those people.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to share about your experience with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and forgive me for being very self-conscious about the subject. It's easier to talk about it over text
Oh,
because,
yeah.
then I don't have to see your face and you be like, gross, yuck, thumbs down, or whatever. No, it's just that like, and it's interesting too because again, with, kind of social media and the proliferation of information, like I feel like there's this moment, or we've been in this moment where there's a lot of like autism influencers, which is a fascinating thing.
Mm-hmm.
My journey with it has to do with the fact that I have two boys, two little boys. My youngest was diagnosed with autism. After we put him in preschool, we just kind of, you know, since we were in the house with young children during the pandemic, and there wasn't a lot of, hanging out and socialization, and stuff like that. And even if there wasn't a pandemic, they were still too young to be in school. We had like certain daycare situations and playground things where they would interact with other children. But it's interesting too because it's like my oldest, he's in first grade, so I feel like he's really starting to have friends. We had a birthday party for him for his seventh birthday, and it was like, oh, he like like these kids, he like knows people. This is new to me that he like knows kids that like want to go hang out with him and like, oh, it's his birthday, let's go over to his place and hang out. I was like, wow, that's weird, because children don't have friends as when they're really young. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So we just figured that our youngest, we kept saying that like, oh, he's a pandemic baby, like he hasn't really been socialized. He hasn't had to be social yet. Because he was very young during the pandemic. So we put him in this, we moved to Atlanta a couple years ago, and we put him in this preschool. And they started to kind of bring, because we were like, oh, he just needs to be around other kids. And they were like, he doesn't really socialize with any other children. Like he really keeps to himself, and, sort of these things that are the markers, I guess you could say, started to kind of open our eyes a little bit. And then we started to see like, oh, there's certain speech development things that, he hasn't, I guess you could say markers that he hasn't, passed, or reached or whatever. And so they are the ones who started to turn us on to the idea that he might be autistic. And so we were like, And as we started to learn more about autism as it stands today, right? So both my wife and I only know what we knew, like we hadn't had to talk about it or think about it up until this point. So it's
Yeah.
sort of like you are at you're starting at a deficit, or I've only heard the information that I've heard. I'm like, yes, I've heard that like, oh, vaccines cause autism, but I've never really looked into it and what that means and what that, where that ideology even comes from. I'll say that I don't agree. I don't think that is true. But we started to kind of look into it, and little by little, as we learned about like sort of the behavioral, I guess, markers and stuff like that, both my wife and I were kind of like, some of this sounds familiar. Some of these things are like, I do that. I've done that. I've always done that. Like this has been a thing that I've always done. And started to kind of learn a little bit more about like perhaps that I am autistic. My son has a formal diagnosis. I will say
Yeah.
that I do not have a formal diagnosis.
Yeah.
However, going into this next year, now that I have health insurance again, I will seek such a thing. I have been diagnosed with ADHD and OCD, which has been, that was like right before the pandemic too. And I was on a SSRI that messed me up, but got weaned off of that. And I'm not sure if I needed that one. Just,
Yeah.
to keep it simple. I'm not sure if I needed
Yeah.
that one because it
Yeah.
really messed with my mood, messed with my
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah.
And, ever since I've been off it, I have felt a lot better. I think at the time it was necessary, and then when I talked to the
Huh.
psychologist that prescribed it to me, I was like, yeah, I'm not feeling like it's working for me anymore. He actually said, oh, you've been on it too long. You weren't supposed to be on it this long. And I was like, okay. He's like, so we could wean you off of it. And I was like, oh, all right, and some of it had to do with the fact that like all of this happened right before the pandemic, that I got diagnosed and prescribed these drugs, and then the pandemic happens and I move across the country and I'm just keeping up with it, just like refilling my prescription and stuff. And so then when I started to feel like, I'm not sure if this is working, I, got in touch again, and it was like, oh yeah, hey, it's been a year. How you doing? Kind of like, oh yeah, you probably weren't supposed to be on that long.
But to put a
go ahead.
super quick pin in that, because I think medication is a really important part of the conversation, and a lot of comedians have talked about it. You did feel like it worked at first, and then it stopped working.
Correct.
For you? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I had a lot of, hesitation going on the medication. And after talking to a couple of different friends of mine who all on medication, kind of like they were my cheerleaders, like, and so once I started taking it, it did work for me for a little bit. And then there was a point where I felt like it wasn't working. Like I didn't feel like I was stabilized. I felt more anxious. I felt more, depressed. I felt more like extreme in some of my feelings. If I'll be explicit, it was Paxil, I think, was what I was taking.
Okay.
And I also was prescribed Adderall, which did not work for me. And then I got Ritalin, and I was like, this one does work. I apparently am very sensitive to medication, so I don't need a big dose of something for it to have an effect on me. So those were the things that I was taking. And then there was a point where I felt like it wasn't working. That's the only way I can really put it. And luckily the psychologist was like, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. I guess he didn't feel like I was supposed to be on it for as long as I was taking it. And that's not, and again, I don't want to disparage medication. I'm not saying like everyone should get off. I don't think that that's the case. It's just, this is my particular experience.
No, I think it's important for you to say, because there's so many people that are against the medication, and that's not helpful, right? Because it does help and support some people. And I think it's interesting for everyone to know that the experience is different. It's not black and white. You 100% took it for a little while, it helped for a little while, and then didn't need it anymore, which is also a way that it can happen. And I think that's important that people know that.
Okay, great. Whew.
Yeah. No, totally. Or that you're sensitive. There are like, amounts of dosages that they think is the correct. They're like, this is the basic dose for every single body. And I am just like you. I'm extremely sensitive. My daughter is extremely sensitive. My daughter is on, I'll just share this. She's on Lexapro. I hope she's okay with me saying that. But she's on basically a microdose of Lexapro. We're both very sensitive to medication. And it changed her life. And I know if she had been on more, right, she could have dealt with more side effects, whatever, which she didn't need. It was the perfect dose for her. But she's actually taking less than the beginning. She's taking half of the beginning dose, not even the dose they think of as therapeutic, but it is therapeutic for her. So just knowing that we're all bio individual and making sure you have a really good doctor is so important.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, and I was glad that, I found that out, I guess, for myself as well.
Yeah.
All this to kind of get to moving to Atlanta, finding out that my child is autistic, researching what it means, right? I stumbled upon this book through the autism influencers, which I'll say, like, it seems like this person or the book might be controversial. I can't tell. I feel like everything and everyone is controversial for some reason. But this book, kind of was helpful to me. It was called Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devin Price. And Devin Price has some detractors. The book has some detractors. I don't know a lot about that, but I will say that it was helpful for me because it kind of, this idea, the phenomenon of the quote unquote masked autistic person, meaning that you may have been autistic, an undiagnosed autistic person this entire time. And you have a bunch of things, masks, if you will, that you wear to hide and to compensate for all of these things. So as I started to learn about it and kind of, think about the apparently, autism is also genetic. So the fact that my son is autistic, it's more likely that, he genetically inherited that from myself, my wife, both of us. I kind of look at my grandmother in a new way, and some people I'm like, that's autism. And I didn't even know, because
Right.
I grew up in this time where we're thinking of autism as a sort of, extreme sort of thing. And yes, and there's all this new thinking about like people don't say Asperger's anymore. That was a particular thing. And it was like, oh, you have autism or you have Asperger's. Now it's all just autism spectrum, right?
Yes.
And there's
yes.
levels. This is what I learned. 1, 2, 3, 44. So, I
Does
will
it go to
find out.
44?
No, I'm just
You made
making
that
that up.
Do you know
That'd be amazing. 44
that would
shades.
be amazing if you're like, I'm a level 2. 1 in 35 is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder now.
See, and this is the thing. This is where it starts to get weird to me because
Okay.
I feel like the conversation that I see is people being like, there's a air of dismissiveness. It's like, oh, everyone's autistic now, and I'm like, maybe everybody is though. Like maybe it's more common than we think it is. There are more people that are struggling to kind of live up to sort of neurotypical ideas and
that's
ways of functioning than
That's
we
right.
previously thought. Perhaps
right.
you could even say it's a phenomenon and some things that are major in our culture should change in general. Like I feel like, and for neurotypical people, shit ain't working. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like,
let's get straight. Right. Let's get it straight.
Let's make some changes. Let's find out what's actually happening. So, and this also seems to be a big phenomenon about like people who have a child that's autistic that are finding out that they are autistic, right? So I'm sort of like seeing that, but when it comes to the things that I think that for me that I identify with the most are, well, a lot of the emotional stuff, a lot of the sort of the behavioral things.
Yeah.
This
Would you mind extrapolating on each?
Yes. So I've kind of always, and it still could be true, let me say, because I will
Okay.
say again, and this is why I get like, it's tricky. Like, I believe I'm autistic, right? I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I'm going to seek to get one. Regardless, some things that I have identified through my life as depression or anxiety might actually be autism things, right?
The OCD and the ADD too.
Exactly. And OCD is one of these things where, because ADD, ADHD, or whatever the hell it's called, it's like, it's still on the same, I guess, spectrum kind of a thing, right? Neurodivergence, neurocomplexity, I've also heard. I like that one, neurocomplexity.
I like neurocomplexity. I've also heard neurospicy.
Neurospicy, yes. That one seems too silly to be used in a formal conversation, but yeah,
Of
neurospicy.
course. This is like a formal adjacent conversation. Well, we're
Okay.
both. Okay.
I got some extra peppers. Some
Yeah,
peppers,
you got
some
some extra.
garlic. It's some oregano that you weren't
Also,
expecting
I
to
think
be
it's
there.
your perspective on spicy. Like, I really like spicy. I'm like super into spice. So neurospicy to me sounds great. Like in the way that it's like, oh, it's neurodivergent. It's just a little spicier. Like I'm into that. So I guess it's your relationship to spice maybe affects how you think about it. But anyway, I digress.
That could be true. Okay, the biggest thing is this idea of I'm not being a human correctly,
Yeah.
right? So like that there's
Right.
this theme, and it's always been a theme in my life, that I'm not a person in the way that everyone else is a person. That like there's the social code stuff has always been confusing to me. That's why I'm obsessed with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Human behavior has always been confusing to me. That's why I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, even as from my childhood, I kind of looked at it. I used to think about like, when I think about middle school, right? I used to talk to people about this. So I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Las Vegas in the 90s was very much like, like Los Angeles in the 90s, and I grew up in kind of a rougher neighborhood. There was a lot of like, there was violence, there was gangs, but when there wasn't violence and there wasn't gangs, there was always the threat of it. There was always the idea of it. It was always in the air. There were always the people who were kind of like, I would say wannabes, that needed to prove that they were tough or whatever. I used to call it code switching, which I think is actually not the right way to describe what I used to do. But essentially, whoever I was around, that's how I acted. You know what I mean? Like mannerisms
Yeah.
and, accents, vocal rhythms, stuff like that. I was mimicking them. Now I know it's called mirroring.
That's
That's
right.
a thing that I
That's
used
right.
to do all of the, whoever I was talking to, that's how I talked. And so people
That's
thought
right.
they liked me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I was like,
Yeah.
I got one up on you. I made you think I was a person. I made you think I was like you.
Where did you get the term code switching from?
Well, code switching is one of these, it's sort of like it's very much in the black community too. It's sort of a way of thinking about the voice that you have at home, the way that you act at your neighborhood versus how you would act at work or in
Oh,
a formal
got it. Got it.
situation. You know what
Okay,
I
I
mean?
see.
So it's
Got
it's
it.
very much a kind of a thing, and there's different versions of it too, but like the one that I kind of think of, there's actually a podcast called Code Switching that's about like sort of like examining what it means to be like a kind of exist as a black person in America and all the different ways that it can and affect you and you affect it. And so this
Got it.
idea of like there being a way that I am that's at home, that's my true self. That's the way that I actually exist, the way that I actually talk, dress, the food that I eat, the music I listen to, and then when I'm around work friends, it's a different thing. That's a little bit more in the code switching sort of thing, but it's very
That makes
intentional.
sense. Women code switch all the time. As a woman, I recognize that as being a woman around my family versus around a man that back in the day, especially a man that I liked, or who I was at work or who I was with my friends, or there's a lot of code that, but the reason why I say as a woman specifically is because it did feel like it was in order to be accepted and regarded in that space. And it was intentional, but it wasn't intentional in a positive way. It was intentional in a survival sort of way.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's why I've always kind of thought about those experiences through that lens because the survival was really, at the core of it. But,
Yeah.
it's at the core of mirroring as well. So it's kind of like I look at those experiences and I realize, oh, okay, like, you know, I was doing something that was maybe a little bit more like mirroring and less like this other thing. Now I think I probably code switched as well, but I think that mirroring was just more of a way that I existed to get through the world, and to embed myself in multiple communities. It was always one of these things that like, especially when I was younger, if like people that I knew from different walks of life were all around me at the same time, I couldn't do that. I was just like, no, 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 because they know me as this person and they know me as this person and they know me as this person. And I can't hold all those things, you know, th- basically being like, I don't know how to be myself. There is no self for me to be, which has always been a thing that I've seen as an existential problem, you know, but it's one of these things that is, I guess, present with the autistic experience.
Yeah,
Just kind
that
of
makes
like,
sense.
oh, how am I? What's a person? People always used to ask me, and I used to be offended by this question because I knew what the answer really was. People would ask me, "Are you always on?" And it was from that judgmental way, like this
Yeah, yeah,
idea
yeah,
that they
yeah.
wanted me to be real, or be
Mm.
honest or be truthful or be authentic with them. But I'm like, there is no real or honesty or authenticity, whatever that word, authenticity,
Authenticity. That
authenticity.
terrible, that terrible word. That cringy ass
Yes.
word.
But the answer was like, yes, I am always on. Because
Yeah.
to exist is a performance. To be around other people is a performance.
Yeah.
And that's always been my experience. I've always felt like there is no me or the me that I think I am when I'm not around others wouldn't accept. And then also trying to being confused by certain social rules, sensory, being sensory overload stuff. That's a big one. And I never even considered, I just felt like, for lack of a better term, I'm a little bitch. And there is no such thing as it's too bright in here. There is no such thing as it's too loud in here. You know what I mean? And I'm just a little bitch and I just need to get over it. But it's like, oh no, I have these sensory overload experiences. I've always had that. And just written it off, and putting it, judged myself about it, basically being like, buck up, be a person. You know what I mean? Like that kind of like, the inner voice is always very punitive.
Is be a person a term now that you've laid over it? Like you can recognize all these moments that you've had and now you can label it, you wanted yourself to be a person. Or did you actually think to yourself throughout your life, buck up, be a person, act like them, be a person, right? Did you actually think that way?
Yeah,
You did. Wow.
for sure. There's just all these groups of experiences. And again, this is why I've kind of been like, all right, well, I guess I've always been looking for what's wrong with me. Right. And so anxiety, depression became sort of the answer to that. And as I learned more about those things, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But now I believe that the anxiety and the depression are a result of these behaviors, right? Of a result of feeling like there's no place for me to be understood. There's actually no place that I'll feel accepted or that I feel like people will get me. Yeah, and so like this idea of be a person, that definitely was like a mantra for me, that I just need to be a person, as if I'm not one. You know
Right.
what I mean? That there's a
Right.
better
Right.
person. There's some
Right.
idea of a person that I'm supposed to be where I'm cool and I'm funny and I'm comfortable and I always have the thing to say, at all times. But the and a big thing that happened when I moved to Atlanta, before I started kind of researching into autism, is burnout like I have never ever experienced. Just a kind of a crash. And I realized this because I said this to my wife too, like, before I was with her, before I lived with her, when I lived by myself, even when I had roommates, but, I didn't share a physical room with this person or a bed with this person. So I could go into my room and close the door and no one would come in there. I
Yeah.
realized that, like, through my 20s and my 30s, I spent so much time alone. And most of that was to recover from being around others. Right now, I kind
That's
of looked
right.
at it as,
That's right.
I guess I'm really antisocial. But now I'm realizing that because being around others, is like I have to be this person, I have to be a person. I'm putting on a show and it feels like I'm doing a show. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, like I'm like, okay, if I'm got to be at a party on Friday night, all right, that means that I cannot go out on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, and I can't see anybody at all on Thursday. So that way I have all my energy saved up, for when I go out on Friday night.
Yeah, I think that is very common experience. I think that I do know other people that also, either haven't been formally diagnosed or they have been formally diagnosed that feel the same way.
Sure. And so like when I moved to Atlanta and I was balancing that. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it was a
Yeah.
kind of a balance thing where it's like, all right, I go out and then I retreat, and I thought, oh, I guess I'm an introvert. That's what that means. But I
Yeah.
did want to be around other people. There were people that I liked, And then of course when I was like a single something in my 20s or 30s, I could disappear for 2 weeks, and nobody would know because I'm still posting, I'm still texting, I'm still making phone calls, but I can't physically be around people for, like if I was just around a bunch of people on Friday night, it's going to take me a week before I could be around a group of people. Again, big groups, that has always been a thing for me, even as a comedian. It's different because as a comedian, like I'm on stage. And so it's like I'm in control of the situation,
Right.
but the hangout at shows, like kind of hanging out at shows, hanging out at clubs. I have a very specific experience in the sense that, unlike a lot of comedians, I never had a home club. The Improv, the Laugh Factory, Comedy Store, In New York, you have the Comedy Cellar or Caroline's. May it rest in peace. It's gone. Now there's the Stand. Certain comedy clubs, comedians aspire to be a regular at that club. You hang out at that club, you watch shows at that club, you get to know the comedians at that club. You hopefully those comedians see you in other shows and go, hey, you're funny. And then they vouch for you. You get an audition at that club. And then next thing you know, you're a regular at that club. That club is your home club. So you always know you have a place to go as a comedian that you can go, even if you don't have a spot, you just go hang out there. Everybody knows you. You know what I mean? That's your home. It's the spot where you go up more than anywhere else. Like some comedians go up every single night at the Comedy Store because that's their home club. Right. And so it becomes it becomes the center, the core of your process, your social network. I never did that.
Wow.
The demand of I have to get in at a club, like the kind of the things I would have to do. I was like, I have to get someone to like me. I have to hang out. I have to do all these. So I just always went where I was booked, which made me into an alt comedian or alternative comedian in New York because they booked me a lot. But it was never something that I pursued, and it was the same with any club. I just never pursued it, It meant that like the social hang of a home club was never something that was a priority to me, and it actually intimidated
Got it.
me. And it was one of the reasons that I didn't pursue it because I'm like, oh, well, then I have to see the same group of people all the time. They're going to see through the cracks. They're going to see through the masks. And they're going to be like, wait a minute, you're an alien. Get out of here. Get on your drone and get out of here, bro. That kind of
That's
stuff.
yeah. It must feel relieving in a sense to be able to look back and go, oh my God, there was nothing necessarily wrong with me that I didn't feel comfortable doing that. This is just a part of me being neurodivergent or neurocomplex or however you
Or
want to.
neurospicy.
Or neurospicy is what I
Too
prefer.
much spice on that brain.
Yeah, baby.
Before I came on this call, I was on the other side of town doing some Christmas shopping, and was driving back here, and I got a text from my wife that was a video of her being like, just in time for the holidays, and then she zoomed in on a package that she got that says cremated remains on it because it's her father. The other thing is, to kind of go back to the idea of like, oh, I could just hide from people for weeks. That has been a big thing that I didn't realize was a big thing for me. It's just like there's someone witnessing me, at all times. And it's like so uncomfortable. And it's taken a long time to kind of get comfortable with it, and now we have 2 children. So there's still a level of discomfort,
Yeah.
that's there that I feel like it's hard for me. I'm still trying to figure out like, because like I said, like, oh, I'm doing a show on Friday and then I'd hide for 2 weeks. Well, it turns out that 2 weeks was the time in which I did all of my writing, which I did all of my auditions, in which I did all of this creative work to kind of get myself, ready to go back out into the world and do more comedy and, do more whatever the heck I was doing. But like that 2 weeks of kind of like holding up that was very regular in my life, I never took stock of it. But like now I'm realizing, oh, that was a pattern, like those were the times where I really like I had to sit there and think and would be with myself and just watch things and take walks and, have phone calls. Again, very different than I'm here with you.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
But like that was the time where I would do a lot of that work. And so I'm still trying to figure out, how to do that, but when there's always people around and there's always my family around, who I do like and I like being with them, and I like that they're around. But at the same time I go like, when am I supposed to do anything? Like if there's always people here and I never have privacy. I mean, I do have privacy. Like I'm in my office right now. But I'm still like, it's just like a psychological thing that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Because a big theme, I would say, is I've spent a lot of time beating myself up for the way that I do things and trying to turn myself into a person, right? And that there's some external prescribed way that if I just do things that way if I just force myself to think and act in this way, then all of these things will happen for me. And that's always been there, as opposed to recognizing the ways that I actually did things and the things that worked for me.
That's right.
And investing in those things. And that's the biggest mind, sort of, I guess, this idea of like, oh, I'm autistic. That thing has become clearer to me, that it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not an asshole.
Yeah. I want to actually say, I want to say that this part is important for definitely everyone that hopefully listens to this. I think this is the most important part, because all the other information that we give them is fantastic, but to learn this one message, I think, is the most important. At least what I've got so far, this lifelong message, and it applies not only to people with autism, it's really in general, depending on what diagnosis you may have, or just what your preferences are, or right sexuality, anything, is there is no real one way. And that template, you brought that word up earlier, actually, that template that was given to us is actually very destructive. And I think all of us are still trying to figure out where we are in between that template of who we think we were supposed to be, or still what we think we want to be. People come to therapy all the time and they want to be fixed. You know, no, there isn't that. It really is more of this sort of like self-insight and compassion. And what you're telling me, you know, this routine that you had, it sounds like, where you took really good care of yourself, is what made you successful as a comedian in a lot of senses. Because you said you would sort of go away to reconserve your energy, but during that time you used all that time to write and create. And then you just had this beautiful ebb and flow and this pattern of hyper focus in a sense during this time, and then come back to society, also learning to mirror people, and all of that probably just made you such a great performer and such a great actor. So it's like nothing wrong with any of this. This is just unique to you. And you're right. And I want to say that because I feel like so many people come in with the same kind of feeling where they just want to be different than they are, instead of looking at what's working for you and why isn't that okay.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's indicative of how powerful,
Yeah.
I guess you could say, the messaging
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
there's a way to be and you're not doing it is, you know, it's just out there. Yeah.
You know what else too?
Yeah.
I think as a let's say I'm a neurotypical person. We'll just say that for the context of this right now.
Sure.
Me also feeling like I'm taught what I'm supposed to expect out of someone, and what, in the way that we're relating, what that means, right? And it's always a reflection back to like how I feel about myself. So I guess what I'm saying is like externalized validation has become so important that I'm constantly, if I'm neurotypical and I'm constantly looking for you to validate my experience in ways that I've been told you will, and then you're on how many times do we have to say these motherfucking words? Neurodivergent. and you aren't relating back to me in the way that I've been taught to be externally validated, then I'm fucking pissed off because there's something wrong with you. And then you feel like something's wrong with you, right? This is very important, this like give and take. And so instead of us adhering to these templates, and instead of us adhering to the external validation, let's fucking get real. We're all people and we're all different, and we're all going to communicate differently, and that's fucking awesome. Let's be there in
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's where I've been, you know, I guess that's the biggest thing I've been meditating on for the last year or so, is what works for me, as opposed to turning me into something that works, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I feel like my family's on the spectrum. You know, I think I told you this. It took me a long time to go, okay, I think there's some spectrum going on here. And I'm not going to get specific for the sake of like they can make their own decisions. But it was really, really helpful for me. And I will say this about my mom. I think this is very important to share. I always wanted my mom to say things in a certain way, to just be the type of person that's really gentle and calm and loving and affirmative and all these things that she just ain't. She just ain't.
Okay.
But what I realized actually as an adult was she really doesn't say anything right, but she does stuff right, if that makes sense. She really shows up with her actions, and she really can show you how much she cares about you with her actions. And you need to work on paying attention to that, because if you're looking for her to be the way again that you want her to be in order to validate what you want to feel, then there's a fucking problem, because she's never going to say it the way that you want her to say it. But she fucking sure as hell does it right. I'm trying to say that understanding people and how they are instead of everybody trying to conform is a really great place to stand from. And how do we really get curious about people instead of wanting people to behave in a way that makes us feel safer?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like, if I can paraphrase it, you're talking about
Yeah.
meeting your mother where she is, as
Yeah.
who she is, as opposed to an idea of who she should be.
Yeah. But we're constantly trying to learn how to talk better or do better or be
Sure.
different or change how we behave. And not all of it is bad. I mean, I'm in behavioral health. I'm bringing that back to what you're saying, because it's like experiencing ourselves as well and meeting ourselves where we're at. What the fuck does that even mean? I love that you said that. But I think most people would go like, I don't fucking know what that means. Really? Meeting yourself where you're at as you really are. And what
Well,
is working for you and what isn't working for you and why.
but isn't it a practice?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it's not like an instant, like you flip a switch and then you just know it. It's like you
Yeah.
you work at it. You practice it. You know, try to
Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
bring forward some rituals, you
Yeah.
know, and because change isn't instant, you know, like it takes centuries for the river to form the mountain.
It does. It takes like at least 5 years of therapy to feel like, you know, who you are.
A little bit, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Actually, we should talk about that.
Okay.
Do you go to therapy? Have you gone? Have you continued to go? I know you went obviously in college. What's your experience with that?
I'm currently not seeing a therapist. There is a therapist that I was seeing for, well, a number of years, actually, really long time in Los Angeles. Obviously, I moved to Atlanta. We were doing video sessions like this. But, you know, just in the last year, it's become an expense that I couldn't spare as much anymore.
Yeah.
But, you know, something that I'm hoping to restart up in the next year. But
It's so
also,
fucking expensive, isn't it?
it can be, it depends, you know, and he
Yeah.
wasn't covered by my health insurance when I did have it, you know, so I was paying out of pocket, but that was because I liked him, you know, that he was a specific recommendation, and that you know, we had a very specific, you know, he's an older dude, that we had a very specific relationship. I've also done a bunch of different modalities, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I've gone to the jungles of Mexico and drank mystic teas,
Yes.
which is similar to some theater school shit. I did somatic experiencing, which I really enjoyed, and I did NARM. Do you know NARM?
I don't even know NARM. So
You know,
let's
you don't
go.
know you don't know your NARM from a NARM in the wall.
I don't know. Two, three quick questions that I think are
Okay.
important. Going back to everything that we were talking about. So, when you first mentioned it to me, you said late onset autism, which I think is really great and really funny. Late
Huh.
onset autism is at like 5 usually, which is so funny for you to be like, I want to talk about. I'm excited to hear about how your diagnosis goes and what you feel and if you feel like you learn even more, if you just have sort of that in your hand, or if that changes the OCD ADD diagnosis, because as a clinician, I often get people and they are often misdiagnosed, and it usually takes quite a long time to really get to the true diagnosis that's really going to support them. Often people come with like a baggage full of like 10 not 10, but you know, like a bunch
Yeah.
of diagnoses, and it came from all over the place, and you're like, this probably isn't right. If there's like 3 or more, it's probably that they haven't figured it out yet. So
hmm
there's
hmm
to me, I just wonder if like once the autism thing happens, like how do they then still feel about OCD, or how do they then still feel about ADD, you know?
Yeah, I'm curious too. I've seen that
So
OCD is one of the things that people get misdiagnosed with when they're actually autistic. Is that what
yes,
you're about to
yes.
say?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to bring that up in general for people that are listening. I think it's so important. People get really attached to their diagnosis. I don't know if you know that I did a TED Talk this year about
Mm.
diagnoses, and that they're kind of a jumping off point, but they're not something to identify with, because often they change and they often aren't correct. And so anyway, I am just really curious as to find out from you what the experience is if you get the diagnosis of autism, if it then changes your OCD diagnosis. I just think it's good information. Maybe we even talk next year.
The funniest thing to me would be if I go to get a diagnosis and they're like, "There's no way in hell you're autistic." Like that would be the funniest thing.
That would be the funniest thing.
Just in general, like it has allowed me to be accommodating to myself, I guess, in a way that I
Good.
never have been, where there's not that "shut up, you asshole, be a person" sort of thing, where it's just kind of like, all right, I have certain needs and inclinations that, and that's just how it is, and it's okay to accommodate for those things and to kind of adjust and integrate those things into the way that I do things.
That's right. You know, you're making these accommodations for yourself, but you have a child with autism.
Hmm.
And I'm just wondering if, like, last moments together, if you have any advice for parents of children with autism, and if you have anything, sort of just straight up advice, thoughts
Hmm.
of what to look into, things that you've learned.
Still learning, about it, and
Yeah.
it's been a very interesting, difficult process because, in a sense, like nothing is really different, as to how we exist as a family. You know what I mean? And it does make us go, because we ended up educationally, like, we're just doing public schools here, and he was in special ed basically for preschool, and our preschool teacher, the one that we had, she kind of recommended him going to this Montessori school, which didn't end up working out. Now he's at another school. So it's kind of like there's an ongoing sort of process to trying to figure out what kind of situation is right for him school wise. But also my wife and I are also like, we're not expecting school to fix him, as much as we want him to feel like, accommodated and feel like accepted in the
Love
spaces
it.
that he's in. Right. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of, things that we've looked into, occupational therapy is a big one. There's also a form of therapy called ABA, which has a lot of I've heard a lot of different things about it. I've heard like, no, never ever. It seems like there's a lot of people who are adults now that were diagnosed with autism as children that had very traumatic experiences in ABA therapy. But I've also heard that it's very different now than it was then. So I'm like, okay, well, let me still do some research then and find out
Good.
what the heck is going
Good.
on. Yeah, but it's just about like trying to identify the things that we need to just best assist him, and meet him where he is, is that one again.
I love
But
it.
like,
I love it.
he's such a great kid, and we just have like, at home we just like him to be comfortable, and have fun and be with his family, which he loves. And we, have little games that we play. So it's kind of like, he's 5 years old, and it's interesting because it's like when I went to the preschool that tipped us off to like, we think he might be autistic. Like I went and I read a book to his class. And so I was around a bunch of I guess he was 3 at the time. And I hadn't, because I wasn't around any other 3-year-olds, but I was like, oh, these 3-year-olds are like talking, like they're saying full sentences. They're like, oh, could you read that book? I'm like, what? You're 3? Well, I didn't know this is what a 3-year-old's like. So it's kind of like there's certain language barriers, that he
Yeah.
has.
Yeah.
But we feel like we know how to communicate with him, and that he communicates with us. And, so we feel like really great just about ourselves, as a family. And we want him to feel loved and accepted above all things, What the other sort of external things that we have to get him involved in, we're still kind of working through and learning about what those things are, what's available to him.
Yeah. We all have a little spice, and my daughter has a little spice in her. So she had an occupational therapist, and when you were talking about it, I actually forgot, and I fondly miss. She used to have a little brush. Did they give you that? Did you guys ever have to do the little brush, the skin brush?
Oh, no.
No. Okay. So her occupational therapist, because she really struggled with stimulation as well, she had this little brush, and so I used to have to brush her skin all up her arms and on her legs and stuff, just this little gentle brush, and you do it every day to help the person, to help her nervous system sort of regulate and also start to like process stimulation in a really beautiful way somatically, which I think you would love because you like somatic experiencing stuff anyway. And I miss that. And I honestly forgot that we used to do this little special practice so many years ago. And you mentioned occupational therapy. It just made me think of that. And it was really heartwarming. And I'm excited for you on this process and for all parents that are on the process with their kids nowadays, especially if they're taking in the information and they're like meeting their kids where they're at. And what a beautiful experience to be in. I know I didn't get that experience necessarily. We didn't live in a world where we were met where we were at. So so happy to like turn that around. So cool. Oh, do you have any stuff coming up you want us to know about? Should I tell people about it?
Nah.
Nah.
Actually, I went to Doc NYC a couple weeks ago. It's a film festival that's a documentary-centric film festival in New York. I did an interview for a documentary that screened there called The Anxiety Club. It's actually the little beanie I'm wearing. It was an interview I did like 7 years ago, and it's a woman named Wendy Lobel directed it, and it's myself, a couple other comedians talking about what it means to have anxiety and to deal with it. It's really, really good. It's something special. Okay. I don't know that she's going to distribute it anywhere, but if you listener are near any film festivals and you see the Anxiety Club playing there, definitely go check it out. It's worth the watch. It's really, really good.
That is so fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And then also you, Baron, and you, listener, go and watch my TED Talk. Thank you. It's about diagnoses, and I think a cute, short, important, and informed message.
Funky. I will do so.
Fucking funky. Anyway, it was so nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you for listening to us today. We know that you could have spent this time with a true crime podcast, but you care about mental health too, and that's balance, and we appreciate you. Go ahead and subscribe, please, and give us 5 stars. And if you didn't like it, like most of my family, just lie. Remember, this wasn't medical advice, but an irreverent conversation about mental health. New episodes drop every Tuesday on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, and everywhere else that we could manage to upload it. And hey, if you liked today's comedian, look them up and follow them. They are brave and they're talented. And if you have friends, good for you. That's a good sign. Now please go tell them about us.